All right, welcome everyone. This is Dr. Clark from the Center for Weight Loss Success. Today on Losing Weight USA, we're going to talk a little bit about high fructose corn syrup, which is a sweetener that came about in the 70s, 80s, in that time frame, and subsequently kind of took over the market. But then there's some real question of whether is this really a safe sweetener or not. We'll go into the what the do's, the don'ts, the goods, the bads, the kind of what are we talking about here. And it's high fructose corn syrup. Welcome everyone. Again, this is Dr. Clark, the Center for Weight Loss Success, and this is Losing Weight USA. Kind of your kind of weekly touch to answer any weight loss questions, as well as some of the latest updates. Gives you direct access not only to me, but you should be receiving the health tips and the recipes via the membership portal. And I encourage you to get into the membership portal. We keep adding more and more things in there, but as all the educational classes, all the webinars, all these live webinars get uploaded, and lots of other information from exercise, recipes, that type of thing. All right, if you have questions during the webinar, just type them into the chat box as we go along. If you think of things once we're all done, just give us a yell at the Center for Weight Loss Success. The email is success@cfwls.com. Phone number 757-873-1880. All right, so again, we're talking about high fructose corn syrup today, and hopefully I can get the slides to work. And I think we're getting there. All right, very good. So high fructose corn syrup. And so when you start to think of sugar, you generally think of kind of the old white stuff in a bowl, kind of a bowl of sugar we all had kind of as we were growing up, sitting on the countertop. But starting in the mid-70s, high fructose corn syrup began to sneak into a lot of the food and beverages that we had. Until now, it makes up almost about 40% of all the caloric sweeteners added to food and beverages. Now, also during that time, a lot of artificial sweeteners have taken off as well, which we discussed relatively recently, I think, as far as all the different sweeteners. But now here we're talking about high fructose corn syrup, which is what, if you want to call it a natural, so similar to sugar sweetener. Okay? And with the it started in the 70s, but in that time frame between the 70s, over the last 50 years, the annual intake of high fructose corn syrup has increased about 1,000%. And what you may have noticed and heard people talk about, Americans' health has suffered since that time. Now, is this just a coincidence between the two, or is there some cause and effect there that potentially may be coming into play? All right, so really the question is high fructose corn syrup, is it just an innocent vegetable sweetener, or is it really the fruit of the devil and is liquid death? I don't know that I'm going to answer that question completely today, but it's some things to think about. So high fructose corn syrup, it comes from corn, okay, and it's in just about everything. Now, nowadays, you'll often see things that are marketed that says it contains no high fructose corn syrup. And that's because of these things that we're going to talk about today, and it's somewhat controversial. Could it be actually making people's health worse? Okay. But high fructose corn syrup is a very common sweetener. It's used in many things: soft drinks, fruit juices, fruit drinks, pancake syrups, popsicles, fruit-flavored yogurts, frozen yogurts. You may find it in ice cream. There's ketchup. It's in ketchup. It's a lot of barbecue sauces, a lot of canned soups, a lot of canned fruits, a lot of cereals. So it tends to find itself into many things that are routine parts of our lives. And so subsequently, it tends to be in just about everything. Right? So what's the history here? Why did this all come about? So high fructose corn syrup was really first introduced in the late 1950s, 1957. But then it kind of became industrialized over the next decade or so. So by the mid-60s, it really was out there, and it was being used in just about everything, and being used more and more often. It was a fairly inexpensive sweetener. Now, the reason it came about so fast is around this same time frame. I'm showing my age here. Castro took over Cuba, and a lot of the U.S. sugar at that time came from sugar cane grown in Cuba. And so typically when Castro came into power, we kind of boycotted anything that came from Cuba, and that still kind of exists today. Slowly it's been opening up over the last few years, but still most of these boycotts have still remained in place, that we can't import much from Cuba at all. So previously we got a lot, not all of it, but a lot of the U.S. sugar came from sugar cane grown in Cuba. And so once we boycotted them, we needed something else as a sweetener. And in that same time frame, the farmers throughout the U.S., as technology kind of advanced, had lots of extra corn. So the really high tariffs and the boycotts of sugar being imported into the U.S., as well as these subsidies that farmers were getting from the federal government on corn, made high fructose corn syrup extremely cheap. And so it kind of took over the market during that time frame. So where does this whole controversy come from? Well, part of it is just kind of the way it's made. So yes, it comes from corn. That sounds okay, doesn't it? And the corn is literally milled down to corn starch, which is just flour. Okay, that kind of is starch. Starch is a flour. It's a carbohydrate. Corn basically is a carbohydrate. So it's dried, milled down. You got corn starch. That's what you're left with. And corn starch then is basically glucose. Is mainly all glucose. And when we talk about our bodies utilizing energy, we talk about glucose. And it's a single, it's a monosaccharide, meaning it's just one, mono meaning one, it's one little sugar molecule, corn starch. And so subsequently, but glucose from cornstarch isn't really very sweet. Now you think about it, yeah, when you have sweet corn, okay, sweet corn is somewhat sweeter, but still we don't think of corn as like eat candy or anything like that. Glucose all by itself is actually not that sweet. And so it's like, okay, how can we take this glucose? We got all this corn, we got it in a sweetener side, kind of glucose, but how do we make it sweeter, kind of in a natural fashion? Well, let's convert a lot of the glucose to fructose. Fructose is fruit sugar. And most fruit is sweeter than most vegetables. Right? So fructose is a fairly sweet sugar. Okay? So what they did then is they took all the glucose from the cornstarch and subsequently then converted it to fructose. And there was a number of enzyme manipulations that had to occur for this to all happen. Okay, but it was fairly straightforward that they could actually do this. Okay, it's just some chemistry. Okay. So when they kind of took this product, cornstarch, which was basically a straight glucose, and then they converted a lot of that glucose to fructose, what they came up with that is what we refer to as high fructose corn syrup. And it isn't that the fructose is 100%. It's like, no, it's actually about 55% fructose. And the other 42%, or not quite 45, because there's 3% of other sugars. And the reason that occurs is that, okay, when I say it's the majority of cornstarch is glucose, well, it isn't absolutely all glucose. And during that process of converting a lot of the glucose to fructose, is that there may be some other byproducts that come along that didn't quite work. So it's about 3% of other sugars. So high fructose corn syrup typically has 55% fructose, fruit sugar, 42% glucose, and then 3% kind of other sugars that are. All right, so some of the controversy comes in is, can you really call this natural? because the enzymatic does use a number of different components that potentially could be problematic to humans if they got into the actual supply of the food, mercury being one of them. Okay, and during this as well, there are some molecules called carbonyls, and carbonyls can potentially be formed just in carbonated beverages. So you take high fructose corn syrup and you carbonate the beverages, some of it carbonyls can form. And carbonyls are something that causes cellular damage and potentially can cause cellular damage to then lead to diabetes. So it's almost kind of working with the actual bean sugar, and there's some carbonyls thrown in there. Does that make someone a higher risk for diabetes? So there's some controversies with this. Now, how does this actually compare to regular sugar? You know, back to that sugar bowl, kind of sitting there with the white stuff in it. Okay. And so typically most of the sugar that's in the sugar bowl actually comes from sugar cane or sugar beets. Okay, so it's not coming from corn or anything like that, or it's not coming from a vegetable. Well, it's beets, but still, they're sugar beets. They're grown for the sugar in them. So most of our regular sugar comes from sugar cane and sugar beets, and a lot of sugar cane's grown in the U.S., in the southern part of the U.S. Now, sugar itself, the sugar in the bowl, isn't just glucose. And again, glucose isn't that sweet. It's actually sucrose, not sucralose. Those are two different things. Sucrose versus sucralose or sucralose. Sucralose is Splenda. Sugar is sucrose. Okay, that makes it kind of confusing. The two words sound very similar. But sucrose itself is actually a disaccharide. Now, I mentioned that glucose by itself is a monosaccharide, just one little molecule. Sucrose is a disaccharide. It means there's two sugar molecules that are put together, and subsequently that's what's sitting in the sugar bowl. It's a disaccharide. Well, that by itself already makes it a little different than the high fructose corn syrup. Now, the high fructose corn syrup is, single monosaccharides, and the percentage of how much is just different. What sucrose actually is glucose and fructose bonded together, which sounds very similar, right? Okay. So, but there is some differences. Again, it's bonded together, so it has to be digested. And so there is some difference there, and something that doesn't really have to be digested, it can just be absorbed. So the bonds together of the sucrose, the disaccharide, have to be broken first in our bodies and during digestion, and then they can be absorbed. So when sucrose is broken down, it's 50% glucose and then 50% fructose. Now, if you think back to the previous slide, I just told you that high fructose corn syrup was like 55% fructose and about, we'll call it low 40s. We'll just say 45 just for keeping the math simple. And so subsequently 55 fructose and only 45 glucose. Well, that doesn't really sound that much different, does it? So you have sucrose, which is 50-50. High fructose corn syrup, which is 55-45. So the difference then is that the high fructose corn syrup has monosaccharides, either glucose and fructose. And they don't need to be digested. They can just be absorbed. As well as, the percentages are different. All right, so sucrose versus high fructose corn syrup. I just have a little picture of what it looks like. The sucrose molecule, the glucose molecule there on the left, and the fructose molecule, and they're bonded together. That's table sugar. And subsequently then, you could look at that same picture, just have them not bonded together, and subsequently then you've got high fructose corn syrup. You got two monosaccharides sitting with each other. So the real question then comes about, with high fructose corn syrup as well as with sugar, could it be the fructose because the body uses the glucose very easily. That's our energy source. Every carbohydrate in the world is digested, is broken down to glucose that our bodies can use for energy. So, since we're giving it something with a head which has significant amount of fructose in it, the fruit sugar, could it be the fructose is the problem? Now, inherently, that doesn't sound right. It's like, what? That's fruit sugar we're talking about. Fruit sugar, fruits are healthy, right? Okay. Well, historically, fruits are healthy. Historically, though, man made very, very little amounts of fructose. Typically less than 15 grams a day. And it was, gee, if they, found some fruit. I mean, fruit wasn't sitting around for early man, the hunter-gatherer type of thing. Fruit, there just wasn't a whole lot of fructose available. Nowadays, though, because high fructose corn syrup has become so available, is that we're taking in 80 to 100 grams a day. So less than 15 grams a day historically, 80 to 100 grams a day nowadays. So, but could it possibly be the fruit sugar itself, the fructose? So if part of it is just a volume thing. Too much of a good thing generally doesn't mean it's a better thing. It generally means it's a worse thing. So going back to the way this is broken down, though, as I mentioned, glucose is our body's energy source, right? Okay, glucose, it's burned for energy. And glucose by itself is a very simple sugar. It's a monosaccharide. And glucose can be burned for energy in every single cell of your body. Okay? Mitochondria that's what they utilize. The mitochondria metabolize this glucose in your body's cells to produce ATP. ATP is the actual energy. ATP is adenosine triphosphate. That's the money, if you would call it that. That's the energy molecule that your body is utilizing. And it does this by sending this glucose molecule through the mitochondria in the cell, and subsequently the mitochondria converts and the mitochondria is going to be energy, or the engine to make this energy, and ATP comes out the other end. Glucose itself can be stored as glycogen in our muscles as well as our liver, so it can be used as an energy source, so we literally don't have to be eating continuously. Okay, we can store some of this energy in our liver as well as some of the muscles, and so subsequently then we can utilize it as our body needs it. Fructose, on the other hand, is metabolized much differently. Fructose, again, by itself, okay, monosaccharide, it's a very simple sugar. It's fruit sugar, but it can only be broken down on the liver and is subsequently broken down to acetyl-CoA. Why does that matter? Okay, as opposed to kind of broken down to the true energy source we love. Okay? It's broken down to acetyl-CoA. Well, acetyl-CoA is the starting point of fatty acid synthesis. So the way our bodies make fatty acids, which is kind of how fatty acids is making the component of triglycerides. And people often talk about triglycerides, and we talk about lipid panels. But in order to make triglycerides, it has to come from an acetyl acid, or acetyl-CoA, which comes from the fructose that is broken down. So what we tend to have then is worsening triglycerides, worsening LDL, which is the bad cholesterol, some worsening of the HDL, which is the good cholesterol, and it kind of opens the floodgates of fat deposition, because it's the building block of fat itself. Comes from this sugar, this fructose. Now, historically, we were exposed to very little fructose. Nowadays, we get fructose all the time, many, many products. So what else about fructose could potentially be problematic? Not just the way it's broken down, but fructose by itself tends to actually stimulate hunger, and it tends to stimulate indiscriminate eating. And it does this, it stimulates this indiscriminate eating by not stimulating leptin. Leptin's a hormone that tends to make us feel full. When we eat, leptin is released, and subsequently then it is a fullness hormone. And it also tends to increase ghrelin. Ghrelin's kind of the opposite then. Ghrelin is a hunger hormone. So it represses or suppresses leptin, which would make us feel full, and it actually stimulates or increases ghrelin, which makes us feel hungry. So it can actually stimulate more hunger by itself. And the fructose itself won't make your blood sugar go up. What I mean by that is when we check someone's blood sugar, whether it be a finger stick or blood draw, we're checking their glucose level. That's what we're talking about. Glucose, again, is not the same as fructose. So if you had high levels of fructose in your body, you wouldn't know that by drawing your blood sugar. That's only drawing, it's looking at your glucose level. So fructose itself won't make your blood sugar increase, but it can worsen insulin resistance. Even again, it itself isn't making blood sugar go up, but it does tend to make insulin resistance get much worse, which then subsequently insulin resistance tends to lead to more higher blood sugars, and subsequently also insulin, higher levels, turns on fat storage. We kind of allude to this almost weekly on this program. The other thing that it does is that fructose can cause a depletion of inorganic phosphorus. And I mentioned ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Okay, phosphate is a phosphorus molecule. Okay, so if fructose can cause a depletion of inorganic phosphorus, then it can lead to less energy, which then leads to fatigue and less ATP. And so subsequently our energy level tends to be much less as well. So you might be more tired, hungrier, okay, worse insulin resistance, and we're tired. So subsequently, fructose by itself can actually cause significant other problems. So what are the potential consequences then of excess, kind of taking in too much fructose consumption? So I mentioned some of those things that it stimulates hunger, it stimulates fats, there's a worsening of the lipid profile, typically there's worsening of just fat storage, which also worsening of fatty liver, which is its own problem. With all this, especially with insulin resistance, then what goes along with it? Hypertension or high blood pressure. Insulin resistance eventually leads to diabetes mellitus, okay, and subsequently then all the other diabetic complications from neuropathy, retinopathy, which is eye problems, kidney problems. These are all small vessel issues. Neuropathy is nerve damage. Retinopathy is eye damage, kidney damage, okay, all from the blood sugar problem that goes along with it. But it also tends to increase uric acid levels. Uric acid is the culprit with gout. Okay? And so subsequently, all these tend to work together, making things worse. And finally, it actually can increase the aging process. And it does this by forming more advanced glycation end products. Advanced glycation end products, or AGE, ages for short, okay, is actually it describes the cellular damage that occurs that subsequently can accelerate aging. Okay? So a lot of these advanced glycation just means that a sugar molecule is attached to a protein that it shouldn't do. It's kind of like, and when sugar molecules are attached to proteins where they shouldn't be there, it tends to make the proteins themselves somewhat sticky. Just like if you spill sugar on the countertop, don't clean it up, eventually you get this sticky mess down there. So if you get these proteins in our body that have an extra glucose that shouldn't be there, if they're on these proteins, one, the protein doesn't work as well, and then other things now tend to stick to it and they get stuck to other things, which then leads to all kinds of other problems. So in summary, there's probably nothing good about the high fructose corn syrup. But it's really, you really can't call high fructose corn syrup the fruit of the devil. The jury's really still out. The real wolf there, the wolf in sheep's clothing, is probably actually the fructose. Because it is digested so differently and turns on a lot of other problems. It is problematic for many other systems in our body. So the real problem probably is the fructose. And really, since both table sugar and high fructose corn syrup contain significant amounts of fructose, it's probably in your best to avoid all of them. Not just saying, not worry about, oh, this one's bad, this one, but all these sweeteners, natural sucralose, table sugar, as well as the high fructose corn syrup, probably a best to avoid them as much as possible, because it's likely the fructose that's in it. All right, yeah, so kind of, I don't see any questions sitting up there, but it is kind of an interesting topic. And so high fructose corn syrup has kind of gotten the, you know, now there's a lot of marketing that says, gee, there's no high fructose corn syrup in something. And now a lot of the packaging, a lot of the beverages have gone back, hey, we use sugar cane only. Okay, well, you know, sugar cane, it's 50-50. It may not be 55-45. But no matter what, it's still really high fructose in there, because fructose is used because it is a lot sweeter than glucose. Glucose is barely sweet. If you actually ate a glucose tablet, like some people carry glucose, gee, I'm prone to low blood sugars, and I got these glucose tablets I carry with me. Typically, they're not sweet. Okay, a piece of candy is a lot sweeter. It's just that glucose can be utilized very quickly and can make blood sugars go up very fast, which also makes them plummet again, but that's a different discussion. But still, kind of glucose by itself typically isn't sweet. It's barely sweet. It's very tolerable, but it's not something, ooh, this is really sweet. It's like, no. All right, very good. Well, if you think of questions, you know, stop by Center for Weight Loss. We're still in the same location where we are looking for new space. And I keep saying that almost every week. I realize, but someday it's actually going to happen. I do encourage you to log into the membership site. We have the weekly weight loss tips as well as the weekly recipes in there. All the other educational materials are in there as well. Tune in each Tuesday, 12:15 for the next webinar. Watch your email for the invite and link. And remember, it's your life. Make it a healthy one. Have a good day, everyone. Take care.